The M3A3 Bradley and the BMP2 IFVs are surprisingly great. When played right, they can completely dominate a game. When played wrong, they're easily countered and wasted. Today, I'm going to provide some insight as to how to play with the IFVs, what loadouts you should run, how to keep yourself alive, and how you can maximize your effectiveness in these vehicles on the battlefield. Let's kick this off. You'd be mistaken in thinking that these vehicles are only strong when playing an anti-infantry role. While they do excel at cutting down infantry accounting to their very strong 25mm main cannon, the versatile set of secondary weapons and perks attached to the IFVs allow them to perform every role on the battlefield well, provided that you play smart. So first, let's discuss the weapons and loadouts on offer, then we'll move to talking about how we can maximize the use of the Bradley and BMP. A great thing about the IFVs is that there are so many viable ways to build these. I wouldn't say that there is one clear best loadout, as there are with so many of the base game vehicles. Adding perks has made these so much more adaptable to each player's playstyle, and while some perks are definitely not as strong as others, there are very few which I would call useless. Okay, let's talk about them. The 25mm cannon is your bread and butter. This weapon does massive damage to infantry, whether you're directly hitting them or using its very generous splash damage. You can use the large splash damage radius in combination with hit markers to flush out sneaky camping infantry on objectives by shelling common hiding spaces. The 8 rounds that you have can be easy to burn through quickly, but they replenish at a good enough speed that most of the time you're fine. Most of the time. You'll begin to feel this replenish time when you're using them against tougher vehicles. Damage-wise, they do okay against light vehicles, but against medium armoured vehicles like the Wildcat and Cavs, or heavily armoured vehicles like the main battle tanks or MAVs, the damage is very underwhelming, but still very necessary. You have absolutely no chance of 1v1ing any of the heavier vehicles with your main cannon alone. It is for that reason you need to take a strong secondary weapon which you can use in combination with the 25mm in order to make up for the lack of punch that this cannon has. It is for that reason you should absolutely not use the Coaxial machine gun on the IFVs. Anything that this machine gun is good at dealing with can be better dispatched with the 25mm cannon. Replace these as soon as you unlock the guided missiles. The guided missiles are awesome, and an interesting addition to the game. It would have been easy for DICE to just put in the AT missiles from the Wildcat on these and call it a day, but they instead developed something new just for the IFVs. While the AT missiles require a lock to be established to be fired, the guided missiles can be dumbfired, then once a lock is made, the rocket will be guided towards the target. As a consequence, these are much more adaptive than the AT missiles, because you can use them without locking on at all. This has two big advantages. Firstly, firing them with no lock attached means that thermal smoke, a very common countermeasure on all vehicles, has no effect, and that vehicles equipped with APS will have less of a heads up that a high damaging attack is incoming. Secondly, since the lock-on weapons give your position away, being able to dumbfire them means that you can more easily conceal your position of attack. Yes, they will still get the warning as your system tries to lock the missile, but it will be a much shorter warning than a full AT missile would give, potentially misleading your opponent into thinking that something other than the guided missile was what hit them. If you're using these dumbfire, then you'll want to be fairly close range, since otherwise they drop to the ground relatively quickly. You should be resorting to the full lock when you're aiming at targets which are further away, all the while knowing that there's a high chance that these might be countered. So if you're not certain that the enemy has used their countermeasures or not, you should probably only fire one missile to try and bait them out, saving the second for a more guaranteed hit. Guided missiles are usually restricted to locks against ground armor, but they can use the designation features of the Softlam and Tracer Dart in order to also be used against tagged aircraft. I'm sure you've no doubt seen that these were glitched when released, so that flares would have no effect on the guided missiles, meaning that if you got a shot off onto a designated jet or chopper, they were guaranteed to hit. While this has been patched out, they are still very good to use in combination with a dedicated recon player. As pointed out in Timeless Gamer's video covering the IFVs, the guided missiles function like javelins, performing a top-down attack on designated targets. Moreover, they can lock onto tagged targets without line of sight, making these incredibly strong. Lock onto your target, then fire your missile, it will fly over obstacles and hit them. absolutely savage. These come with 2 guided missiles and they do very good damage to vehicles. One irritating thing is that they only reload once both have been spent, so if you fire one and you're in between fights, it's worth dumping your remaining missile so that you're ready for your next fight. It takes roughly 24.5 seconds to replenish your guided missiles. This is quite a significant amount of time, and while your missiles are out, you're very vulnerable to vehicle attacks. Additionally, you have to keep your guided missiles equipped in order to maintain the lock. You cannot fire and forget, so if you're over eager like me and after launching swap back to your primary cannon to stack up the damage, your missile will no longer maintain the lock and will typically miss. These seem like the best option out of the box, but after playing with them, their downsides are quite evident, especially at medium to long range, where you need the lock in order to get anything out of them. If you aren't hitting these because they're countered, then you're putting yourself in a rough spot for the enemy to come back at you with a very swift counterpunch. They're absolutely best used at close range and dumbfired to avoid this.
A lot of guys at Delta.
Ah, the TOW. I love launching those beautiful wired guided bundles of joy into enemy aircraft and vehicles and infantry and anything really. The tube-launched, optically tracked wire-guided missile is a staple of the IFVs from previous games, and clearly I'm happy to see it back. If you're the one other guy who likes playing with the SRAW, then you'll immediately notice how much more maneuverable these are in comparison. They also have a long life duration. I've had instances where I've missed my original aircraft target, have started focusing on an enemy on the ground, only to have the abandoned missile come back and RKO my enemy out of nowhere. Their damage is definitely lower than the guided missiles, and you only get one before you have to reload, but the reload time is quite a bit less, being around 15 seconds. Since these give no warning and are manually guided, having them counted happens much less frequently, meaning that you're absolutely able to use these at a good range. You can also launch the TOW missile, then swap to your main cannon while you're guiding the missile, which isn't something that you can do with the guided missiles when using the lock. Get the first missile launched, rush in with your main cannon to close the distance while guiding the TOW to the target, then once the next missile is ready, finish them off with that. Continuing the comparison with the guided missiles, having a weapon which can deal with aircraft is very good to have, since with the guided missiles you need to have someone soft slamming your target in order to be able to use them against helicopters or jets. On the other hand, these are a much higher skill ceiling weapon. If you aren't able to get used to the feel of the TOW missiles in order to get consistent hits, then you'll find this weapon very underwhelming. Finally, if you want something more dumbfired, you can use the APFSDS-T Sabot shells. These work practically identically to your main cannon, with the big difference being that these are an anti-vehicle shell, having little to no splash damage, but having the power to rack up big damage against vehicles. This weapon comes with a 6-round maximum. After a recent patch, swapping between the 25mm and the Sabot rounds has a slight delay, so I recommend unloading all of your AT rounds against the vehicle first, then swapping to the main cannon to maintain some damage, then swapping back to the Sabot, at which you will have replenished around 2 rounds to get the kill. There isn't much more to talk about these. They're very effective at what they do, and if you're good with the 25mm cannon, then this will feel very at home. Moving on from weapons, you have the first equipment slot. And finally, we have some good alternatives for thermal smoke. I've spoken about thermal smoke a lot in past videos. It's the only choice you should take in the smoke slot in all other vehicles, since it lets you counter lock on missiles. But with the IFVs, we get some perks which we can select in place of thermal smoke. The first is active armor. This provides a 25% damage reduction to direct incoming damage. It should be noted that the in-game description says that it does not reduce damage against explosive damage. What does this even mean? Well, I initially thought that this meant that non-direct hits still cause the same amount of damage, but this isn't the case. I tested this by throwing an AT grenade down by the side of a Bradley, one with active armor, one without, and found that the explosive damage did in fact do 25% less damage to the active armor. What it is actually referring to is damage from C5 and AT mines, both of which do the same amount of damage with or without active armor. Really, the description should have probably just said that. This is a really good defensive perk that really should be considered compared to thermal smoke. I like to look at it this way: most damage you take in IFVs comes from fire and forget weapons, M5 and RPG shots from engineers, main battle tank shells, and other direct sources of enemy vehicle damage. Taking 25% less damage from all of those sources really adds up. When you're playing with active armor, you can really feel the increased survivability. Even if you do take a hit from a lock-on weapon, this is also reduced by 25%. Lock-on weapons are much less common, and usually if you do take a hit from one of them, you should be looking either to block the next shot with cover, move out of sight lines from the lock, or kill the source as soon as possible. For me, the better defensive perk is the active armor, but if you choose to run thermal smoke, I wouldn't say your choice is wrong. If of course you're a strong believer that the best defense is a good offense, then you'll want to use the improved warheads package, which increases the damage of your primary and secondary weapons by 25%, but at the cost of taking 25% additional damage from all sources, turning your IFV into a glass cannon. The extra damage is really noticeable. Your 25mm cannons on average will be downing infantry in 2 shells instead of 3, and your secondary weapons will be packing much more of a punch against armor, helping you finish them much faster, but at the same time taking 25% more damage is very significant. In fact, it means that an engineer equipped with an RPG can 2-shot you from either the side, turret, or rear. Given this massive weakness, is it worth it? Well, it depends. You're essentially banking on you being able to kill your enemies before they can kill you. Sometimes you'll feel like an absolute monster with this perk, and you'll be tearing through everything the enemy can throw at you. Other times, you'll be killed before you can even get into a fight by a random engineer who is able to hit their shots. My suggestion is that you're using this perk to keep moving and to try and stick close to cover. If you're caught sitting still out in the open, you're going to get absolutely wrecked. This, again, is another good perk which is very pickable. I wouldn't say that there's one best choice in this category. What do you guys typically run here? Let me know in the comments. Next, we have the second equipment slot, where we have the choice between repair function or APS. I've discussed these in detail elsewhere. The TLDR is that APS is absolutely the best choice here, no contest. In most cases, APS is reducing your damage taken by more than the health the repair function replenishes. Also, considering your APS could block multiple sources of damage and that the repair function can be interrupted, reducing the health the repair makes, it makes this choice a no-brainer. Finally, we have the third equipment slot, where we have more interesting perks to choose from. We have the stealth package, which does 3 things. It makes it so your IFV cannot be spotted by regular means. If, like me, you've ever been slamming the Q key trying to spot an IFV just to get nothing, no, it's not the spotting being buggy. They're equipped with this perk. It would be nice if we got some kind of indicator, like what we get when you're trying to spot a Blasco, so that we know spotting isn't possible. It causes lock-on weapons targeting you to take longer to acquire the lock. This additional lock time is quite significant too. Acquiring a lock with such weapons is already a little janky in 2042. Sometimes the slightest bit of map geometry can reset your lock, and this perk just amplifies this. Finally, it removes the vehicle's thermal signature so that it cannot be easily seen with thermal weapons. The only 2 thermal weapon instances which this would make a big difference are the 30mm passenger cannon on the attack choppers and everything that the Droger is equipped with, and it is very effective at concealing you against those 2. Overall, the stealth package is actually pretty good. It comes with a lot of benefits, which individually aren't anything special, but as a collection can increase your IFV survivability. Quick reload package is amazing, and honestly it might be the best perk in this slot. Replenishing all of the driver's weapons 25% faster is massive. Even if this just affected the 25mm cannon, it would be great, considering how often you need to wait for them to replenish. But it also affects your secondary weapon too. There isn't a lot more to it. This piece of equipment rocks.
Oh god, fucking damn it.
The maintenance perk is another interesting one. It decreases the time your IFV takes to start auto-repairing and repairs it at a faster rate than usual. Your repair starts at around 11 seconds and replenishes 10 HP every 4 seconds, compared to without this perk, where your repair starts at around 14.5 seconds and replenishes 10 HP every 5 seconds. This means that if you're able to retreat from an attack, you can repair up and get back into the fight quicker. One question you might ask is, does this repair repair rate increase affect the repair function? Well, I did some testing and I can say no. No, it does not. This kinda sucks, because if it did, then maybe I could see a world when choosing the repair with maintenance over APS could be viable, but as it stands, APS is still the clear winner here. The maintenance perk itself is pretty decent. Your last choice here is a proximity scan, which will spot infantry within a 20-meter radius of your IFV, and it will also ping you with this little beeping sound, warning you that enemies are close. My first thought was that this could be really good on maps with lots of houses, since you could use this to figure out which buildings are occupied and then commence shelling them. Unfortunately, 20 meters is really not a significant distance, and it becomes clear when you're using this. Most of the time, I would have seen the target way before my proximity scan was able to pick them up. I think in order for this to be viable, the range really needs to be increased. I guess it might be useful for someone who's constantly getting C5, but if the enemy is running at you and throwing C5, then the 20-meter warning isn't likely to save you. The final loadout choice you have is your secondary passenger seat. I say that, it's not really a choice. You should definitely equip the HMG with thermal over the regular HMG. This will help your passenger keep you alive, letting them spot and deal with enemy infantry much easier. Definitely don't neglect to change this. So what do you run? Honestly, there are so many good choices here that you really have to find out what works best for you. What do I run? Well, my main loadout includes the tow missiles, active armor, APS, and the quick reload package, and I can do some absolute work with this. So how do I maximize my effectiveness on the battlefield with these vehicles? Well, exploiting cover is an absolute key for these vehicles. If you're caught out in the open most of the time, you're going to be easily picked off. Try the strategy of peeking when your weapons are ready and retreating and maneuvering around when they're on cooldown. This is the best way I've found to keep my IFVs alive, and at the same time keeping up the pressure against enemies. In addition to this, choosing your fights at the right time in the BMP2 and Bradley is critical. They have a big burst of damage, but if you engage enemies while your weapons are still replenishing, then you're guaranteed to come out the loser. Finally, 2 minor tips. Did you know that the BMP2 is amphibious? Yeah, this thing floats. Does it affect anything? Not too much. But I've had some good games floating up and down the river on the Battle of the Bulge map. Just a heads up though, the Bradley does not come with this same feature. Do not attempt this unless you want your Bradley to meet a soggy end. There are 2 rear seats and they come with pretty effective LMGs, but they come with a massive downside. Their field of fire is tiny. They can only fire in the range shown here, which is very restrictive. If you have a coordinated squad, you could try rolling your IFV around in reverse to get the maximum effectiveness out of the rear seats. But if you do this, of course, you're opening yourself up to taking some high damaging rear shots. So definitely don't try this strategy with the improved warheads package equipped. What do you think about the IFVs? Did DICE do good introducing them to 2042? Let me know in the comments. And if you've enjoyed this video, why not check out another one of mine? I promise that they're all pretty okay. Anyway, I hope you have an awesome day. Take care.